The auditorium lights glared down like judgment, bleaching the faces of students and scholars alike. At the center, Professor Adrian Voss basked in their attention. His voice thundered with authority, rich with the arrogance of someone who believed himself the final word on every matter concerning the ancient world. He held up a reproduction of a Mayan codex and sneered, "These markings are decorative, nothing more. The Mayans were not capable of complex symbolic writing beyond what we already know. Anyone chasing further meaning is wasting their life." In the shadows of the back row sat Elias Crane, the quiet archivist. His posture was small, his hands folded in his lap, but his mind was ablaze. Every word the professor spoke clawed at him, not because Elias disagreed, though he did, but because he had evidence locked in his drawer at the archive, evidence that the professor's final word was nothing but ignorance. He thought of the manuscript he had found only days ago, its pages brittle and stained, yet alive with strange patterns. Voss's laughter filled the room. "Some archivists and amateurs," he said, with a glance sharp enough to pierce flesh, "imagine they will discover a secret no great scholar has found. Fantasy, delusion." The audience laughed with him. Elias felt the heat in his chest rise. For years he had worked in silence, cataloging, preserving, dusting off forgotten manuscripts. He had no prestige, no platform. His life was measured in ink stains and calloused fingers. But what they didn't know, what Voss could never imagine, was that Elias saw patterns others dismissed as smudges. His mind slipped back to a memory, vivid and unwelcome. He was younger, sitting in a dim study across from Dr. Aurelio Mendez, a man disgraced for his radical theories on Mayan astronomy. "You must look at the spaces between," Mendez had whispered, pressing Elias's hand to the parchment. "The silences speak as loudly as the words. Symbols are constellations. They only tell their story when seen together." Elias had never forgotten that. It was his secret, his hidden inheritance. Back in the lecture hall, Voss strutted like a peacock. The myth of the lost Mayan city is just that, a myth. No codex, no inscription, no artifact will prove otherwise. Scholars have spent centuries chasing phantoms. I will not waste another moment indulging nonsense. Elias's fists clenched under the desk. He wanted to stand, to shout, to hold up the manuscript and show them all the truth, but he couldn't, not yet, not without certainty. He could already hear their laughter, see their mocking smiles. Quiet archivist, dust-brushed nobody. What could he possibly know that a professor with 10 published books did not? Still, the manuscript symbols burned in his memory. They weren't random. They repeated in ways too precise, too deliberate. He remembered tracing them late at night, his lamp glowing dim, the silence of the archive pressing close. Each symbol felt like a star in an unknown constellation. And slowly, impossibly, the constellation was taking shape. He didn't know where it led, but he knew one thing: it was not meaningless. "History is written by men of vision," Voss boomed, slamming his hand on the podium. "And vision requires discipline, not childish fantasies of hidden cities." The students applauded. Elias felt his throat tighten, as though invisible hands were strangling him. He knew what he had to do, though fear gnawed at his resolve. He would continue the work in silence, decoding the manuscript piece by piece. He would prove the professor wrong, not through debate or arrogance, but through truth. Inside, a voice whispered, "Patience. Wait. The time will come." The applause thundered again, but Elias didn't hear it anymore. He saw only the brittle manuscript waiting for him in the archives, and he knew its secrets would not stay buried forever. And as he left the hall, invisible among the crowd, his heart carried both the sting of humiliation and the seed of defiance. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Voss's life. Elias walked into the night, the city's lamps flickering like ancient torches. The quiet archivist was not yet ready to speak, but soon the manuscript would demand its voice be heard. The archive was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and hummed in the ears. Elias Crane had always found it comforting, almost sacred. Tonight, though, that silence was heavy with expectation. He moved carefully through the maze of shelves, his lantern in hand casting long, twitching shadows across the room. His colleagues had gone home hours ago, leaving him alone with what lay hidden in the dust. He approached the locked drawer in the back of the room. The key rattled faintly in his trembling hand. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, was the manuscript he had unearthed only days before, a forgotten codex shoved between a pile of mold-ridden parish records. He remembered the moment he found it, the texture of the worn leather binding, the smell of centuries trapped between pages, the feeling that the air around him had shifted when he pulled it free. Laying it gently on the table, he unwrapped the cloth. The codex was smaller than the famous Dresden or Madrid codices, but its pages were alive with strange marks, spirals, dots, and glyphs unlike anything in the catalogs. Elias's heart thudded as he turned the pages, careful not to let the fragile fibers crack. This was not decoration. It was language, deliberate and precise, as though someone centuries ago had hidden a message inside the chaos. He lit another candle and leaned closer, eyes narrowing as he traced the ink with a gloved finger. The pigments shimmered faintly, an odd blend of faded reds and deep blacks. At the edges of the page, faint notations in Spanish script caught his attention. Someone else had tried to understand this before him. The handwriting was frantic, cramped, as if the writer was rushing against time. Elias whispered aloud, "Who were you?" The words tasted like dust. The notations weren't translations, at least not complete ones. They looked like fragments. Estrella, alignment, sacrifice, camino perdido, star, alignment, lost path. His pulse quickened. This was no ordinary devotional text. Whoever wrote those notes believed the manuscript pointed to something hidden. His mind flashed back to Voss's cruel smirk in the lecture hall. Fantasy, delusion. Yet here was proof of intention patterns that begged to be read, margins that screamed with mystery. Elias sat back, closing his eyes for a moment. He let the symbols float in his mind, drifting like constellations against a night sky. He heard Dr. Mendez's voice from years ago. The silences speak. Look at what repeats. Look at what does not. He opened his eyes and saw it. A sequence. A glyph shaped like an open hand appeared again and again, always near a spiral of dots. The more he flipped through, the more it reappeared. Not random, not art, a signal. Elias leaned closer, sketching the glyphs on scrap paper. His breath fogged the lantern glass as the night deepened around him. He barely noticed the hours pass. He was no longer just an archivist tending the dead. Tonight, he was a listener at the threshold of a voice that had waited centuries to be heard. But as the candle guttered low, another thought crept in, sharp and unwelcome. If this is real, what will happen if others know? He imagined Voss tearing it apart, dismissing it, burying it forever under mockery. He imagined greedy collectors clawing at it, eager to turn truth into profit. Fear twisted in his chest. Perhaps silence was safer. Yet the codex seemed to pulse under his fingertips, as if urging him on. Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "Number, not silence, not this time." When the dawn light seeped pale and gray through the high windows, Elias was still at the desk, head bent over the manuscript. He had sketched half the pages, noted repetitions, traced the alignment of symbols. And though exhaustion pulled at his bones, something stronger kept him awake. The certainty that this manuscript was a key, and he was holding it. For the first time in years, Elias felt not small, not invisible. He felt chosen. The next evening, Elias Crane's eyes burned from lack of sleep. He had spent the entire day in a haze, barely tasting the bitter coffee that kept him upright, his thoughts consumed by the codex. He returned to the archive with a determination that bordered on desperation. His colleagues thought him a quiet, dutiful man. They could never imagine that beneath his calm exterior surged a storm of revelation. He spread the manuscript open again, smoothing its crinkled pages with reverent care. Tonight, he wasn't alone in spirit. Whoever had scribbled in the margins centuries earlier was with him. The inked notes were erratic, but they hinted at something monumental. Elias leaned closer, lips moving silently as he read fragments. Door under the sun, blood and stone, path not found. His breath quickened. These weren't just observations, they were breadcrumbs. He pulled out a magnifying lens and examined a corner of the manuscript where the parchment had warped. At first glance, the symbols there seemed no different than the rest. But beneath them, faint and nearly erased, were smaller marks, notations written in a different hand, sharper and more deliberate. He almost missed them. They weren't Spanish. They were Mayan numerals. Elias froze, his mind raced. Numerals meant measurement. Measurement meant direction. He began sketching rapidly, copying the sequence onto his notes. 5, 13, 20, 260. His heart stuttered. The numbers mirrored the sacred Mayan calendar. They weren't random, they were coordinates in time. His pulse hammered in his ears as he saw the connection unfold. The numbers corresponded to days, which aligned with solar cycles, which in turn matched positions of stars. It was a roadmap hidden in plain sight, encoded not in geography, but in the heavens. The lost city, if it existed, could only be found when the sky mirrored the code. He sank back in his chair, sweat prickling his forehead. The audacity of it overwhelmed him. If he was right, this codex wasn't just a manuscript, it was a celestial guide. And if that was true, then the myth of the lost Mayan city was no myth at all. But the thought curdled into fear. What if others already suspected this? What if that frantic scholar who wrote the notes had tried to follow the trail? He scanned the pages again, heart pounding. Some passages had been deliberately smudged, as though someone tried to hide what they'd found. He whispered to himself, "Did you find it? Did it destroy you?" The silence gave no answer. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he pressed on, his pen scratching furiously against the paper as he copied every note, every sequence, every faint symbol. Hours later, when his hand finally cramped too much to continue, he slumped back in his chair. The codex lay open before him like a living heart, throbbing with secrets. And then he noticed something he had overlooked. On the final page, in the margin, the unknown scholar had scrawled one last line in a hurried, almost desperate hand. Solo el que escucha en silencio abrirá el camino. Only the one who listens in silence will open the path. The words chilled him to the bone. Was it a warning, a riddle, or perhaps a prophecy? He closed the manuscript slowly, his hands trembling. In the darkness of the archive, Elias felt as though unseen eyes were watching him, waiting for him to choose. Bury the codex back in obscurity, or follow where it pointed. Inside his chest, his heart answered before his mind could. He knew he could no longer stop. Rain pattered softly against the high windows of the archive, casting long streaks across the glass, like ink bleeding down parchment. Elias Crane sat motionless at his desk, staring at the manuscript as though it were a mirror reflecting his own past. The phrase, on its final page, "Only the one who listens in silence will open the path," would not leave his mind. It seemed written for him alone, as though the centuries had conspired to deliver this message into his hands. But Elias knew the truth. He was not just a lucky archivist who stumbled upon a manuscript. He carried a secret skill, one forged years ago in shadows and silence. His thoughts drifted back, unbidden, to a cramped study in Oaxaca. He had been only 20 then, restless and eager, when he sought out Dr. Aurelio Mendez, once celebrated as a genius in deciphering Mesoamerican glyphs. Mendez had been disgraced, mocked as a fraud by the academic elite for his unprovable theories. Elias remembered the ridicule Mendez suffered, the way colleagues whispered madman when his name passed their lips. But Elias had seen something different. He saw the brilliance hidden beneath the man's weary eyes, and so, in secret, he had gone to Mendez's study, night after night, poring over manuscripts by candlelight. "Do not read with your eyes alone," Mendez had told him once, pressing Elias's hand flat against the vellum. "Read with your silence. The spaces speak louder than the words." The Mayans knew this. They wrote for the listener who hears what others cannot. At the time, Elias had not fully understood, but he remembered the old man's patience, the way he guided him to trace repeating glyphs, to hear rhythms as if they were music. Mendez had taught him to look for patterns invisible to most, a discipline of listening. When Mendez died in obscurity, his name a stain in academic circles, Elias buried his training along with him. He returned to the archives, resigned to cataloging and dusting, his secret hidden like contraband in his heart. He told no one, not even his closest colleagues. Better to be silent than mocked. Until now. Now, staring at the codex, Elias realized his silence had been preparation. The professor's jeers, the scholar's desperate notes in the margins, the cryptic warning at the end of the manuscript, they had all aligned like constellations, guiding him toward this moment. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the glyphs. He no longer forced meaning. He listened. The symbols began to pulse with rhythm, dots and spirals, aligning like beats in a forgotten song. His breath steadied. His pen traced their sequence, and suddenly it was there, a map not of land, but of time and sky. Elias whispered, "You were right, Mendez." A shiver ran through him, not from the chill of the room but from the weight of what he had uncovered. The manuscript spoke of a place hidden when certain stars converged. The lost city was not merely buried beneath jungle or stone, it was veiled in time, waiting for the heavens to signal its return. The archivist sat back, his heart pounding. He thought again of Professor Voss, the man's booming laugh and disdainful glare. For years Elias had lived under that shadow, too timid to raise his voice. But now he felt something else, stirring a quiet defiance, a strength born of silence. He imagined Mendez watching from the beyond, whispering encouragement. He imagined the Mayan scribe who had inked the pages, trusting that someday someone would hear their message. Elias lifted his pen and began copying the alignment chart into his notes, careful to mark each symbol with precision. As he worked, a realization struck him. This codex, if revealed, would not just change his life, it could shatter centuries of certainty in the academic world. And suddenly, he understood the risk. Such a discovery could make him a target mocked, dismissed, perhaps even silenced, like Mendez. But it could also rewrite history. He closed his eyes, the rain still whispering against the glass, and let the thought burn through him. The time for silence is ending. The storm had passed, but Elias's mind raged louder than thunder. For nights he barely slept, consumed by the manuscript's secrets. Each page pulled him deeper into a labyrinth of glyphs and numerals. He filled notebooks with sketches and calculations, his hands trembling as though guided by something beyond himself. It was on the fifth night, under the dim yellow glow of the archive's lamps, that Elias stumbled upon the pattern that made his blood run cold. The sequence of hand glyphs and spirals, once baffling, fell into place with frightening clarity. It wasn't merely a calendar, it was a code of alignments, describing celestial events that spanned centuries. But one particular alignment stopped him short. A convergence of Venus, the Sun, and a specific star cluster. His pulse thundered. The date it predicted was now. Elias rubbed his eyes, convinced exhaustion was tricking him. He recalculated. The answer was the same. The codex pointed to a window of time that opened in mere weeks. The lost city, if it existed, was waiting to be revealed now, beneath this very sky. His hand shook as he traced the line of glyphs once more. This knowledge should not exist. Every textbook, every lecture, every sneer from Voss had insisted the Mayans lacked such astronomical sophistication. Yet here it was undeniable. Undeniable, Elias whispered. This shouldn't exist. The words echoed back in his mind, growing heavier. What he had uncovered was heresy to the world of scholars. If he revealed it, he would face the same fate as Mendez: ridicule, professional ruin, exile. And yet, if he stayed silent, the truth would die with him, entombed in dust. A flicker of memory pierced him. Mendez, coughing blood into a handkerchief, whispering, "They'll call you a dreamer. Let them. Truth waits for the one who listens long enough." Elias shut his eyes, the image searing. Was this what his teacher had foreseen? That the code would demand a listener willing to endure the weight of mockery? The archivist's chest tightened with dread. He imagined the consequences: the professor's laughter, the board of scholars shaking their heads, the museum stripping him of his position. He would become a ghost, like Mendez, remembered only for failure. And yet another thought struck him, sharper, more intoxicating. What if he was right? What if he was the first to hear the voice of a civilization long dismissed? What if he proved them all wrong? Elias leaned over the codex, the lamplight trembling with his breath. He copied the final alignment chart, each stroke of ink heavy with purpose. His fear gave way to a grim resolve. He could no longer bury this. The manuscript demanded to be heard. But as he packed his notes, a sound shattered the quiet. A door creaked at the far end of the archive. Elias froze, heart hammering. He wasn't supposed to be here at this hour. The silhouette of a man filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, familiar, Professor Voss. The older man's voice carried sharp disdain. "Still playing with your fairy tales, Crane?" Elias's throat went dry. He slid his notes closed, but Voss's hawk-like eyes caught the movement. The professor strode closer, his lips curling. "Ah, more fantasies. Tell me, do you truly believe you'll be the one to uncover a lost city, when men greater than you have failed?" Elias wanted to remain silent, to shrink back into obscurity, but the manuscript burned inside him, and the words escaped before he could stop them. "The code exists, Professor. You're wrong, and soon everyone will know." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, thicker than the shadows of the archive. Then Voss laughed, loud and cruel, the sound ricocheting off the shelves. But beneath his ridicule, Elias saw something flicker in the professor's eyes, an unease he could not disguise. The lecture hall was overflowing. Every seat taken, the aisles crowded with eager students and visiting scholars. The air buzzed with anticipation, as if the entire city's academic community had been summoned to watch a spectacle. Professor Adrian Voss stood at the podium, resplendent in his tailored suit, his booming voice commanding the room. "Today," Voss declared, "we will dispel once and for all the persistent myth of hidden Mayan codes." His gaze swept across the audience, sharp as a blade. No amateur archivist's fever dream can overturn centuries of scholarship. The words stung, though Voss hadn't spoken Elias's name. In the back row, Elias Crane sat with the manuscript on his lap, its fragile pages tucked safely in a protective folder. His palms were damp, his heart pounding against his ribs. He hadn't planned on attending. But when the flyers announcing Voss's public dismissal of nonsense theories spread across campus, Elias knew he could no longer remain silent. Voss launched into his performance, projecting slides of known codices, emphasizing the accepted interpretations with smug certainty. "Notice," he said, pointing with his laser pen, "the glyphs are purely ceremonial, tied to harvest rituals and calendrical cycles. No maps, no codes. And yet," he paused, smiling coldly, "some would have you believe these glyphs hold secrets to mythical cities." Absurd. Laughter rippled through the hall. Elias's throat tightened. The humiliation he had endured for years pressed against him, urging him to stay quiet. But his fingers brushed the codex in his lap, and he remembered the words scrawled in its margin. "Only the one who listens in silence will open the path." Silence had brought him here, but now silence would betray the truth. Before he knew it, Elias was on his feet. His voice shook at first, but it cut through the laughter. "You're wrong, Professor." The hall fell silent. Heads turned. Voss's eyes narrowed, like a predator spotting prey. "Mr. Crane," he drawled, "the archivist, have you come to enlighten us with your fairy tales?" Elias's hands trembled, but he held the codex high. "This manuscript, misfiled, forgotten, contains a sequence of glyphs that align with astronomical events. It's not decoration, it's a code, a map written in the sky." Gasps erupted. Students leaned forward. Scholars exchanged startled looks. Voss's face darkened, but Elias pressed on, his voice steadier now. He flipped to a marked page and held it toward the projector. "Here, see the repeating hand glyph? Always paired with spirals of dots. These correspond to Venus's cycle, to alignments across the 260-day calendar. And here, his pen traced the numerals hidden in the margins. These are notations of dates. They point to an alignment happening now." The room crackled with energy. Murmurs spread like fire. Someone whispered, "If that's true." Another, "Impossible." Voss slammed a hand on the podium. "Nonsense! Coincidence dressed as genius. This is why archivists should remain in their place." His voice thundered, but there was a tremor beneath it, a crack in his certainty. Elias met his gaze, his quiet eyes unflinching. "You can mock me, you can call it fantasy, but the code is real. And if you refuse to see it, history will remember your blindness." The audience erupted, some in laughter, some in awe, some in heated debate. For the first time in his life, Elias stood at the center, his voice louder than Voss's contempt. The professor's lips tightened, his fury masked by a forced smile. "Then prove it, Crane. If your code is so real, take us to your phantom city." Elias hesitated. The challenge was dangerous, reckless, but also inevitable. He looked down at the codex, at the centuries-old ink that pulsed like a heartbeat under the lights, and nodded slowly. "I will," he said. And for the first time, the mighty professor had no laughter left to give. The jungle greeted them like a living wall, thick with vines and the damp scent of earth that had never seen sunlight. Cicadas screamed from the canopy as Elias Crane pushed forward, the codex clutched protectively inside his pack. He wasn't alone now. A small expedition had been hastily assembled, skeptical scholars, a few eager students, and, at the insistence of the museum board, Professor Adrian Voss himself. From the moment they arrived in Mexico, Voss had seized command. "Follow my lead," he barked, dismissing Elias's careful notes. "I won't have this circus led by an archivist who's never stepped foot in the field." The others deferred to him, intimidated by his authority. But Elias knew every step they took followed the codex's alignments, not Voss's bluster. For days, they hacked their way through choking undergrowth, guided by Elias's quiet certainty. Each night, as the campfire crackled, Elias studied the manuscript by firelight, comparing the stars overhead to the glyphs inked centuries ago. He whispered to himself, repeating the sequences until they became incantations. The others mocked him, muttering that the archivist had lost his mind. Voss was the loudest voice of all. "You're leading us to nothing," he sneered one night, his face lit orange by the fire. "When we return, Crane, your name will be mud. You'll be finished." But Elias did not rise to the bait. Inside, though, his thoughts churned. He heard Mendez's voice again. "Truth waits for the one who listens long enough." Elias pressed the codex to his chest, as though it could steady his heartbeat. He could not falter now. On the fourth morning, the group reached a ridge overlooking endless green. The jungle stretched to the horizon, broken only by a river snaking silver through the trees. The scholars groaned in disappointment. "Nothing," one muttered. "We've wasted our time." But Elias's eyes fixed on the sun rising behind a distant hill. He yanked the codex from his pack, flipping to the page etched with the hand glyphs and spirals. His heart quickened. The alignment was here. The hill's silhouette matched the sketch hidden in the manuscript's margins. "It's there," he said softly. Then louder, with steel in his voice. "It's there. The city." The others laughed nervously. Voss smirked. "You see shapes in clouds, Crane." Elias ignored him. He pointed to a cluster of carved stones, half buried at the hill's base, barely visible through the underbrush. "Those aren't rocks. They're markers." He pushed ahead before anyone could stop him, hacking at the vines with a machete borrowed from one of the students. What emerged stole the breath from every throat. A staircase, worn and broken, climbed the hill beneath centuries of roots and soil. Moss-covered glyphs stared back from the stone, identical to those in the codex. The jungle itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias's knees weakened, but he forced himself to stand tall. "This is the path," he whispered. The students rushed forward, awe on their faces. Even the skeptical scholars fell silent, tracing the carvings with reverent fingers. Only Voss remained behind, his jaw tight, his pride cracking under the weight of proof. That night, the camp was alive with excitement. Plans were whispered of excavation, of rewriting history books, of fame and prestige. Elias sat apart, staring into the fire. He felt none of their giddiness. For him, this was not triumph. It was vindication, justice for Mendez, for every forgotten voice dismissed by arrogance. Yet beneath the thrill, unease gnawed at him. The manuscript had guided them here, but it also carried warnings: sacrifice, silence, path not found. He couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle had only revealed its first secret. And as the flames licked higher, Elias lifted his gaze to the stars. The same stars that had whispered to the Mayans whispered now to him. And in that moment, he knew the true revelation was still ahead. The jungle was hushed the morning they climbed the staircase. Mist clung to the stone, curling like breath from the earth itself. Elias Crane's heart pounded with every step upward. The codex pressed tightly against his chest. Around him, the team moved in a stunned silence, awe choking back their doubts. Even Professor Voss said nothing, though his face betrayed the storm beneath his composure. At the top of the hill, the vines parted to reveal ruins that time had buried. Walls of stone, carved with intricate glyphs, half-collapsed temples, and plazas where roots coiled through ancient altars. A city lost to history stood before them, its bones still alive with mystery. The students gasped. One knelt to touch the ground, whispering, "We're the first in centuries." Elias's eyes burned. He opened the codex and compared the carvings to the inked pages. They matched perfectly, as though the manuscript itself had been a promise waiting for fulfillment. His trembling fingers traced the symbols that had haunted his nights, proof undeniable. For a long moment, the archivist stood silent, the weight of centuries pressing on him. He remembered Mendez's study, the ridicule heaped upon the old man, the whisper of dreamer. He remembered his own silence in lecture halls, the laughter of peers, the smirk of Voss. And now here he stood, in the heart of a lost city, truth alive beneath his feet. But as wonder spread through the group, Elias noticed something carved deeper into the altar at the plaza's center. A warning. He brushed away the moss and read the glyphs aloud in a hushed voice. "The city hides its heart. Only the listener will pass unharmed." The words chilled him. He thought of the desperate note scribbled in the manuscript's margin. Only the one who listens in silence will open the path. A test, a demand for humility. Elias bowed his head, as if the stones themselves expected reverence. Behind him, Voss's voice rang out, raw with desperation. "This discovery is mine. Do you hear me, Crane? Mine. History will not remember an archivist. It will remember Professor Adrian Voss." He strode forward, shoving aside students, placing his hands arrogantly on the altar. The ground trembled faintly, dust sifting from the ruins. A sharp crack echoed through the plaza. Voss froze, fear flashing in his eyes, but pride held him still. Then, slowly, the tremor subsided. The jungle fell quiet again. But everyone had seen. The stones themselves had rejected arrogance. Elias stepped forward, laying a gentle hand on the altar, as though soothing a restless spirit. He whispered, "Not to Voss, not to the others, but to the city itself. I hear you." And for the first time, the ruins seemed to exhale, their silence deepening into peace. Weeks later, when the site had been secured and word spread through the academic world, Elias returned alone. The city shimmered in the fading light, and he walked among its stones like a son among ancestors. Voss's reputation had collapsed overnight. Stripped of authority, he vanished into bitter obscurity. But Elias did not gloat. He knew pride had no place here. In the months that followed, scholars descended upon the ruins, rewriting history with every shard uncovered. Yet none could deny that it was Elias Crane, the quiet archivist, who had opened the path. His name was spoken now with respect, his silence finally understood not as weakness, but as strength. Standing before the altar, Elias placed the codex down gently, returning it to the city it had promised. He whispered into the humid air, "For you, Mendez, and for those who listened." As the sun sank, casting gold across the jungle, he felt a profound stillness settle inside him. The lesson was clear. Arrogance builds walls, but humility opens doors, even to cities lost for centuries. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. And so the archivist, who once lived in shadows, became the voice of the forgotten, his triumph not in fame, but in the truth he had carried through silence.